I'm going to get this going and I'm going to turn it over to you. So everybody, welcome to the Laramie County Extension's Beekeeping Series. And tonight's speaker is Michael Jordan with a Bee Friendly Company. And Michael's been teaching and helping me with the Wyoming Bee College since 2014. And Michael's got, you have what, about 15 years of beekeeping experience behind you?
Yeah, we started beekeeping in 1999 is when we first got into it and bought our first 1,000 hives in 2000. So we've been keeping bees for a while.
Okay. So as we were
I guess
talking
what we're going to be
about,
talking about is
yeah. So we've everyone's situation with swarms is a little different, and there's, like you said, probably 100 different ways to deal with swarms and catch them. But tonight this is Michael's version of how he deals with swarms and how he catches them and uses them to help build up his apiary. So I'm going to turn the program over to Michael, and it's your show.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. If you don't know who I am, I'm Michael Jordan. I don't play basketball. I can't jump. So I keep bees. We've been keeping bees since 2000. We first got into beekeeping in 1999. And I was a commercial pollinator. That we used to send bees to California to pollinate the almond fields and then move them across the United States to pollinate fields and then bring them back for honey flow in Wyoming. We have a couple good locations for saffron and clover honey. And the reason I think swarm is a great topic to talk about is one is people panic when they see them. I mean, when you see a big cloud of bees going and stuff, people really start to really freak out because it's like it's a cloud that you can't see through sometimes. It's kind of interesting to watch. The second thing is that I think it's a great way to you got to see the program with Tate Belden about the split system, the Turnoff split system, which talks about making a fake swarm. So based on that, you're making queens and you're making them naturally, and you're able to use swarming techniques to populate your apiary. And number three, I think swarm control is very necessary, especially for people that are doing backyard beekeeping and hobby beekeeping and commercial beekeeping. Not much on the industrial level. The industrial level, we're already making lots of bees and we're using them just for mass pollination. When you have 10,000 to 30,000 hives, if the bees swarm and you have your traps out, you get them. If you don't, that's not much what you're worried about. You're more worried about the population of your hives for pollination contracts. So there's like three reasons. And we're going to go with the first reason is apiary management. I think that swarm control is very necessary, that if you have bees, you need to build some traps and you need to mitigate your swarms so that way they don't infest other people's buildings, cars, structures, and just are a nuisance in basic public. A lot of people are backyard beekeepers having up to about 5 beehives. And with that, you need to do control by putting a screen or lattice about 5 feet in front of the beehive so they go up in the air, and you have to do some management. So the mitigation is swarming. And a lot of people just don't get into their beehives and split their beehives when they see activity or do expansion and making more room in their bees. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of show basic swarm traps. I got a couple videos, how easy swarms are easy to take, and the difference between a removal and a swarm pickup and some stuff like that. So if you guys can see it, like swarm is in season, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to do a little quick PowerPoint presentation. What is a swarm? And as you can see, I talked about earlier about like a huge fog bank of bees. I've had a beehive swarm when I was at my house, and I just put the bait in my hand and went out across the street, and all the bees just gathered on my fist, and just had a big clump of bees on my fist, and I shook them inside of another box because some of my bees were swarming, and the swarm traps I had were in the back of the yard and not in the front of the yard, where I had a box that swarmed and was going across the street. So I just walked out with some bait and put it in my hand, and the bees just swarmed all the way around, kind of like this photo. They just make a big fog of bees, and they just gathered all around my arm, and then I just shook them into a hive. So what is a swarm? Uh, the swarming of the honeybee is natural means of reproduction. It's the process of swarming, and a single colony can split into two or more distinct colonies. So it's how breeding happens, is that when the hive is too full, they make another queen, and the queen with the majority of the worker bees leaving back the nurse bees and stuff to make another queen and to start that hive over again. And they usually take about 50% of the honey and 50%, if not more, of the bees. In this process of swarming, a single colony can split two or more distinct colonies. So we might get calf swarms, which are usually smaller and have a virgin queen. So you might get one big beach ball of swarm that goes out, and then you might have a couple little ones depending on how many queen cells were in the hive, and and how many cells there were before there. Sometimes the beehive will swarm in succession until there is no bees in the hive, and then you're all done, right? And that happens to a lot of hives that people don't check. People ask me, like, can I have bees and not have to really check them? You can, but over a period of maybe 2 to 3 years, those bees will extend, and then you won't have any bees because there's not enough for a colony. They've all left, and then you'll have a swarm come back. And some people say, oh, this beehive's been here for 15 years, and it's probably have 2 to 3 different colonies move in over that 15-year time period. So swarming happens when the population is too much for the housing structure that they have, and they will move with all the worker bees, leaving nurse bees back to make a queen and start a new colony. And this also helps with your brood breaks. So by making these, by having a swarm, the hive that you have, if you have just one swarm, this will be a brood break for you at this time of the year, which helps with a little bit of mite control. So the bees are doing a natural mite control formation by themselves by doing this brood break. Now, the call for the free bees. Now, people say, oh, we've got a swarm of bees. Now, that's what's on the left side. It's hanging from a tree, the side of a car, fence post. Somewhere is a cluster of bees, anywhere from a softball to as big as a beach ball, that is a colony of bees that have moved from a hive. And the hive can be from a beekeeper themselves. I have caught some swarms that have marked queens in them because the beekeeper wasn't watching his hive and I took his bees. And I have caught swarms that have had marked queens in them. But on the right side there, you see what's called the removal, and that is not a swarm. This is another money-making opportunity by a beekeeper. That this takes not only the skill of doing what they call a cutout, but also what we call building and industrial trade. That you might have to remove the bees in a manner where a contractor can come in and fix and repair, or if you're skilled in yourself in the trade, you'll be building a beehive or rebuilding a building for somebody that had a structure in it. As you see here, that this one was completely full and it was a mess. And then you'd have to rebuild it, pull out the insulation and all kinds of stuff out of the structure. So are they truly free? Now, bee removal is a process for removing bees from a location. So if you see a big bundle of bees on a limb, or you see them on an eave of a house, or I have some photos and stuff where they swarmed on the side of a truck, and I had to put my bait hive on the side of the truck and let the bees migrate into the bait hive, and then I just moved the nook somewhere else. So you have to see the process of what they are. Are they truly free? This is not a swarm of bees that can be removed fast without damage to a structure. It's a removal. And live bee removals or saving the bees can be accomplished by a local beekeeper who will then remove and keep the bees for themselves, or they remove them and they make nooks and stuff and they sell them, or they'll remove them and they'll give them to the people that the occupancy hive was from. But not all beekeepers provide this service. That this is kind of a specialized service by beekeepers on doing removals, that it takes some contractual skills and stuff to do a cutout. And many removals, the bees cannot be saved, and the bees are killed. And what that's all about is that sometimes the structures are so condensed and compact that people are calling that they're a nuisance. And when you have a nuisance and stuff, they want the bees gone right now. They don't care how they are. And sometimes eradication happens. That I was actually forced to do an eradication for Governor Matt Mead. That he had a colony of bees move in to Schrader Funeral Home here in Cheyenne, and they used that building for the relocation for the governor while they were building the Capitol building. So they had lots of bees inside the wall of the structure, and I told them that we have to remove some parts out of it to get the colony out. And they said that this is a historical building and that we cannot just cut into bricks and move the bricks and remove siding and stuff off of the structure, that the bees need to be eradicated, that they're a nuisance. So some things to think about that. A removal has a cost, and we charge about $90 an hour, and they can take several days to do and days to cost to repair. We ask for people, if you have a removal, that if you have them in the wall or something where you have to do damage to the structure, you should probably call your homeowner's insurance and see what they all accept and charge, because many homeowner insurance now are accepting this cost, because you can't sell the house because they have a nuisance in them, and sometimes they're damaging to people. And a lot of people with disabilities that have walkways and wheelchair ramps and stuff need the bees just gone. So we charge about $90 an hour, and we do a 5-hour minimum with a $500 cost up front, and that mobilizes us there so we can open up a structure. So removal is completely different than a swarm take. Swarm removal. So I'm going to see if we can click on this. I haven't tried this before, but a typical swarm removal, we're going to see if this works and if we can get into the structure here and see if it shows it here. It's wanting to. I mean, there's a lot of videos on YouTube and other bee groups that have them. So, so you can see I'm spraying a swarm of bees on a tree with some sugar water.
We can't see it.
Hey, Michael, your page is still on swarm removals with Facebook
Oh,
page.
is it? It's not doing all right, let me see if I can remove this here then. All right, so on that it says typical swarm, and what it does is it's going through and it's basically showing a cluster of bees in a tree. And what I'm doing is I'm going up and I'm spraying that cluster of bees with sugar water just 1-to-1 sugar water. And what it does is it's got a sticky solution on the bees, so the bees are kind of sticking together a little bit, and they're not all flying off at you and stuff. Now, a swarm is not really super aggressive. When a swarm takes place, it's usually the mated queen that leaves the hive and leaves with a group of worker bees, and the worker bees during the swarming action fill their stomach with honey so they can transport it, so they can start working in the new beehive, because the queen doesn't feed herself and they need some sugar solution to start making comb. And it makes the bees fat, so they don't really bend, they don't really sting, they're not really super aggressive, because they're super vulnerable right now. This is during a swarming attack. Here in Wyoming, we don't have bee killers, but in some areas, right, like if you have robins and woodpeckers and stuff that are right near your area, when this happens, this is a feeding frenzy for them, because they can just start picking stuff out of the air and eating these bees. So they're very vulnerable. They're full of honey and nectar to move to the next colony. So this video is showing a group of bees on a tree, and what I'm doing is I'm spraying them with some sugar water to get them all kind of clustered together so they're not, flying everywhere. And then what we slowly do is we just cut the limb off the tree, and it's just a small branch. And we just place the whole branch in a 5-gallon bucket and put a lid on it. And the lid has a cutout in the top and screen glued to the top of it so the bees can breathe. And what we do is we just, off all those bees are taken, we usually just set that bucket down by where the swarm of bees were, and we usually let it sit till the end of the day. And the reason we do that is if there's any other bees that were flying, they're going to gather on top of that bucket lid, because that's where the queen's at. She's in the bucket and the pheromones coming out. And then we just take the lid and turn it over and shake it in the bucket. And that way we get all the bees from the location at one time. And what's really cool about like a swarm, like I said, I had a swarm going out in front of my house, and I just put lemongrass oil in a cotton ball, and I held it up in my hand up in the air, and the bees just gathered all around it, clustered all over it. And then I just shook it in a Nook box and dropped the lemongrass oil cotton ball inside that thing and put the lid on it. And in over a 2-hour time period, all the bees just started congregating on the box and going in and fanning. So when you do a bee removal, it's going to be like in a tree. If it's a big, huge limb, or if it's on the side of the house, you'll need to bring a bee brush. You won't need a bee vac or anything like that, but we usually bring a big 5-gallon bucket and a bee brush and a lid that has a cutout in it with screen in it, so the airflow and stuff can come out of that beehive or out of the colony of bees. And we usually go up, and if it's like on a rock, we just put the bucket up against the rock and just brush all the bees into the bucket and put the lid on it, just walk away and let it sit, and then all the bees will collate it during the day. And usually by about dark time, there's a big bundle of bees on the lid. You just take it, flip it over, and dump it in and leave with the bees. Now, not a swarm removal is the video that's 9 minutes long on your left. It's done by JP the Bee Man, and he's world famous for cutouts and bee removals. So you're going to be able to see the difference between just an easy pickup from bees to a bee removal. And JP is like I said, world famous. He has gone through, if you look him up on YouTube and you want to learn how to do cutouts and open up a building to take out the bees, this is the gentleman you want to watch. We do them and stuff, and I learned from him, right? I talked to him for hours about how to really get in there and find the queens and make sure you're doing stuff and removing the comb and the brood out, and how to wire the brood into a frame. So a removal is different than a swarm catch. A swarm catch is super easy and should only take you minutes. You should show up with your bucket, or a big butterfly net works great on a long pole. and you just slip that up over the beehives, and you just give it a shake, and they all fall in the butterfly net. And you can just twist that butterfly net, just twist the rod, and they're all trapped in the bag, and you can just take that with you. So swarms are super easy to get a hold of. And when you hear one or you hear one call, just make sure you have a hive set up. You want a location where they go, and you want to have something to catch them in. So let's see if we can. So swarm trap. Swarm trap is a box to attract bees called a bait hive or swarm trap. It is basically a watertight wooden, plastic, or fiber box with a volume to 5 to 12 gallons and has like a 2-inch entrance towards the bottom of the wall where many swarm trap models can even empty a carton, or it doesn't matter. You can catch bees in about anything as long as you have a bait and stuff. As you can see, this picture over here is a guy modified one of my designs on a swarm trap, and he put it, in swarms are like from bee trees or apiary management. That's the only way they're going to come from, is from a location. We call them bee trees, but it can be a structure from a house or a car or somewhere where these bees are living and have occupied for a long period of time. The bees have occupied this location and has gotten too small for the colony, and they move on by breeding, which means they leave a queen behind, or a queen cell that'll hatch for the hive that they left, and the queen leaves with the worker bees to swarm. And you're going to build a swarm catching box is what you're going to build. Now, as you can see, this one over here, this is a design that we've made to catch swarms. This one has a nook box in the air, and you can see just the base of the bottom of the nook box where the bees are starting to gather on the bottom of the box here. But this extends up in the air. I have a YouTube video on my YouTube channel on how to build these out of a 5-gallon bucket and some PVC pipe, and how to put them around your apiary and to put them out in the trees. And that way, when the bees swarm from your beehives, they go right into these swarm traps. And there's all kinds of swarm traps. There's not just one kind. There's I think Man Lake and Dannett sell one that's like paper, but it's like fiber. It's like a big fiber bucket with a hole in the bottom of the bucket, and you stick it up against the wall, and the bees go in the little hole in the bottom of the bucket and fill this all in. So I mean, there's many types of swarm traps. Your basic swarm trap is a place for the bees to go. It can be a nook, like you see just set up in this tree here. It can be a bucket. It can be a hive box, a cardboard box. It really doesn't matter. You need a bait. A bait is used in helping the bees get to the trap, and you need a place to put the bees after you catch them. So we all know how a swarm happens now, right? It's when the hive is too small for the colony, and the mated queen leaves with the worker bees, and that's your swarm. Or it could be after that swarm's left and another cell hatches, and there's just so many bees in there, it may make another round and leave with a few bees, right? So it's just a group of bees during the breeding process of bees leaving and going. So this mated queen and stuff's going to fly out, and it's going to fly to this box hooked to the tree. You need to put bait in it so it makes the bees go. Some people just like to use frames with honey and old brood comb, and the bees will migrate to it. Myself, I like using lemongrass oil. Now, for a bait for the trap, I like to use a Slurpee straw, because they have a spoon on the bottom of the Slurpee straw, and you can put your thumbtack right in that straw, right on that cutout where the spoon is on the straw. You just put your thumbtack right in that spoon, and then you can tack it to something. And a lot of people are using lemongrass oil. I use lemongrass oil. It works really good. There are some lures that you can buy. They're in like little tubes. You break them open and stick them in there. But the best way I found to use a lure is in a straw. And you just take a straw and you fill it full of cotton. And then what you do is you just dip that in your lemongrass oil. And because it's in the plastic straw, the air is only coming from one end and the other. So it keeps the lure in the cotton long. Some people just take a Q-tip, dip it in, and then place the Q-tip in the straw. But I like to pack a little cotton in my straw, and I like a Slurpee straw because, as you can see on the right-hand photo, it has a little cutout. You just push your thumbtack in that cutout, and then you can just thumbtack that in your swarm trap. And that way it has lemongrass oil in there. And lemongrass oil is almost like an identical smell of the pheromone of a queen swarming. So like I said, when I was walking outside and the bees were swarming everywhere, I just took my hand about, made a little cup like this, and I just stuck a cotton ball in it with lemongrass oil and held my hand up in the air. And the bees just all started gathering around me. It looked like a big boxing glove on my arm. And then I just shook that into a box and dropped the cotton ball in it, put the lid on it, and then the bees started going in and out of the door of the nook. But if you put cotton in this plastic tube, it doesn't dissipate as fast, and you get longer use of the swarm or the swarm lure. Instead of dissipating in 2 or 3 days, it can last up to a week. And I'm going to tell you, if you build swarm traps around your apiary and you think your bees are going to swarm, check that swarm trap every 3 days, because the swarm trap we make, after about 5 days, those bees not going anywhere, and on a hot sun, they'll cook inside that swarm trap. So that's why a lot of people like using nooks or old hives, because then they can just move them and it's not a big deal. We're doing a mobile swarm trap so we can relocate and do some stuff with them.
Hey,
But this is
Michael.
how you build your, yes, ma'am.
Got a question here from Kathy, and she wants to know if that straw hangs down from the thumbtack. So how is that going to look?
So, if you're using a 5-gallon bucket with a lid, I just push the thumbtack through the little straw spoon that's cut out there into that straw, and I just push it up on the top lid of the bucket. If you're using a nook hive, you just put that on a frame. You just push it right into the comb of a dead out, or in the wax foundation of a frame. You just push it right in there, and it'll hang in there. You don't just. Some people just put cotton balls and throw them in the nook or in a beehive. You just throw a couple cotton balls in there with it. The one thing is don't saturate the cotton ball, because if the pheromone is way too strong, the bees will be pushed out by it. It's just like wearing too much cologne going to work. Your workers will be offended by it and go away. So what we usually do is we take a cotton ball and just put 4 or 5 drops on a cotton ball and put it in a beehive. On the straw, I usually dip the straw halfway in the lemongrass oil. Just put it in, put it out, take 2 seconds. 1, 2, and I pull it out, and then I just thumbtack it on the lid of my swarm traps, and I put the lid on it. And then it just saturates the swarm trap itself, and then the bees are attracted to it. If you could ask her if that answers her question, it's not big science. It's just that we use the plastic straw because then the smell from the lemongrass oil doesn't dissipate as fast. It's got that protective shroud over it, and it's only leaking out of the top and the bottom of that straw, and it lasts longer. So how to build a swarm trap. If you take out your phones and stuff and you take a picture of this link talks about how to make a mobile swarm trap on how we make them. And what we do is we take a 5-gallon bucket and we cut a piece of 3-inch PVC pipe and we cement it in the center of that bucket so it's standing up in the air. And that cement bucket gives that weight, so that way you can have something to really hold this swarm trap down. And we use a 3-inch piece of PVC pipe that's 5 foot tall, And in the inside of it, we stick a 2-inch piece of PVC pipe, so that way you can extend it in the air, right? And how we do that is we just lift it up. We put pins in the 3-inch pipe to the 2-inch pipe, and it's extended in the air. And on the end of the 2-inch pipe, we put our 5-gallon bucket on it with our pheromone oil in it. And you can just cut a hole in the bottom of the bucket, and the bees will go right in that little 2-inch hole. Or you can do on the bottom of the bucket where it's flat and get a nook disc that you can turn and you can swivel, which makes it really cool. And you turn it, you open it all up so the bees come in the bottom of the bucket and all up, and they gather on the lid of the bucket. And this whole thing describes kind of like what you saw back here. As you can see how the pins go through the pipe, and you kind of extend this up in the air. That's kind of how we're building our swarm traps. And you put them on 15 feet away from your hives, 15 to 20 feet away from your hives, or you put them directly above your hives by about 7 feet. And when the bees fly out of that beehive, due to the fact that swarm trap's right there, they'll fly right into it. And you just save your colonies by doing this. This makes it really easy and super cool. Right, so if you watch this video here, it shows mobile swarm traps and how we build them really cheap, just with PVC and buckets. I think the whole swarm trap and the whole mechanism is under $60. And for, to catch a swarm of bees, that when you're getting a whole colony of bees at 10,000 bees, and you're paying for packaged bees with a queen and 10,000 bees, and you're paying anywhere from $100 to $150 for that, $60 to collect the same exact thing in a bucket is nothing, right? And here's what the bucket looks like, the swarm trap in the air right there. All right, as we put it near a tree next to our apiary, and the bees just kind of started swarming into the bucket, as you can see right there. So with the lemongrass lure and on the bucket on the top of the stand from that video, we're catching swarms right by our apiary. And this is kind of something you need around your apiary. You should be putting swarm traps around your apiary, so that way you're not having the bees go somewhere else and become a nuisance for somebody. And if you only have a few hives and your bees swarm like this, your colony that you just had in a hive is dissipated. So you might want to take the frames out of that hive, put it in a nook box with the queen cell it's making, and then just dump these bees back in that hive and let them start working all over again. And now you don't lose your bees. So one thing about the swarm trap is apiary management. So you don't have a nuisance to your fellow man, and you're not losing your bees from your apiary. So that's one reason to have them. So I'll give it back one more time. This will be a good time, if you can, take a picture of this so you can look it up, and you can watch this 8-minute video on how to build a mobile swarm trap that's super successful. And like I said, people have modified them, and instead of using buckets, have put nook boxes on them and stuff, which is super cool. That's fine. I mean, there's no difference. You're just building a box with bait to have a home for the bees. Now, a bee tree is a tree that a colony of bees live in at, and the bees have made a home in the tree, old building, or occupies a place where they're not going to be removed. They live there and will stay in this location. Now, this right here is not a bee tree. I just wanted to show this. Jonathan Powell in the UK over in Europe, he does a class called tree beekeeping, where they actually climb up the trees and they hollow out certain sections of trees to put bees in them and let them live naturally in the bees, and it's a form of natural beekeeping. And this is kind of like what he does. This is what it would look like in a bee tree if you found a tree with bees. in it. So this is what it looks like when you cut it open. Basically what it looks like inside of a tree. And when this area gets too full, the bees swarm. So I just kind of wanted to show you that if you really want to look into tree beekeeping, you can look at Jonathan Powell. He writes some good articles on tree beekeeping, and it's way different. Bee tree keeping is different than having a bee tree, because the bee tree is where the bees live, and they're going to swarm from that location. So if you find a tree like this and it has an opening like this with the bees in it, to have a bee tree can supply you with a swarm every year, if not more. And if you place one of my bee traps by that tree and stuff, the bees will swarm out of there and right into your trap. So this is a form of getting freebies all the time. So you're able to just go ahead and put a swarm trap by a tree, and this will be your free bee, just for your investment from making a mobile swarm trap or doing a swarm trap. And what I have found out, and locally here in Cheyenne, is that I have a map of my city, and when I get a swarm call or a bee removal, I put a thumbtack in that location. And in some locations on my map, there's a lot of thumbtacks. So like, just to give you an example, I have 2 swarm traps at the VA center here in Cheyenne. I have had a lot of calls there. I've had to do lots of bee removals out of the building, and there's a lot of thumbtacks in that area. And I have located, based on where the thumbtacks are, where I put my swarm traps. And somewhere in that location, there's a bee tree, or there is somebody in that area that has a beehive, and they're not managing it very well, because I get a swarm in my swarm trap. So if you get swarm calls, put thumbtacks in the maps, and if you see where big clusters are, put your mobile swarm traps in those locations, and then you'll be able to get free bees on an annual basis. So a bee tree like this, or a home that no one cares about, or an old beat up car that has a swarm of bees in it, that if the bees are swarming out of it, you'll be able to catch them. And this trap by the tree collects bees for free. So that's something to think about. So not only good for apiary management, it's a way to collect free bees, that go with it. So place your swarm traps around your apiary. Like I said, there's the picture of some of them that are with the nook boxes that a gentleman put all together. He's getting ready to put them out. Here's one right in the center where they have put the bucket right by their apiary. And when the bees come, they swarm right up in the bucket and they can collect them. Here's one, and you can see, like I said, the 5-gallon bucket with the concrete, the 5-foot pole, the 2-inch pole, right, or the 3-inch by 2-inch pole, all extended in the air. And this allows the bees to collect and go into a location. And right here's just a bucket, a guy mounted on the side of a tree, drilled a hole in it, and is collecting swarms that way. So basically, it's just a location in a box that has a bait in it that wants to lure the bees to it. And then it just has something that's available where you're able to remove it and dump it. I like the buckets because they have a handle on them, and you can just dump the bees into a hive or a nook after you collect them. So I like the bucket method of using it.
Hey,
Now,
Michael,
yes,
I
yes, ma'am.
got a question for you. And the
Sure.
question is from Eric, and would a swarm trap with the lure in it tempt your current bees to swarm?
No, the only reason they're going to swarm is if they're forced to. So you can have lemongrass oil sitting there and the bees might go check it out, but they're not going to move into that location unless they have a queen. The swarming in the swarming location only happens if they're completely ready, because you can have clipped wings on your queens so they can't fly and leave the hive. So you'll have a big swarm happen, and then the bees just go right back to the original hive with the bees all over it. They won't go anywhere because the queen can't fly. She's trapped. So that's a form of when that happens, to go in and you can remove the queen out of there. and remove a couple scoops of bees out and make a split. So luring the bees and putting swarm traps by your apiary will not force the bees to swarm. They have to have an overextensive amount of colony in a small location, and they have to be ready to swarm. They just won't leave. So hopefully that answered your question. Just let Kathleen know if that answered, if we need to change it or do more with it. But as you can see here, some people are just using nook boxes, 5-gallon buckets. Dan it, and I think Man Lake make a it's like fiber. I think it's almost like paper mache. It's really thick that you can buy. But you can watch many videos on making swarm traps. And I always put swarm traps around my apiary, and I put them about 15 feet away and roughly about 10 to 15 feet in the air. And that way when the bees come out and they're swarming, right, they just go right in those traps. And I can kind of get them away from the hives that they came from, so I can weigh the hives. And I can say, ooh, this one's light. This is where they came from. I might go ahead and just go through that hive and make a split and dump those bees right back in it. And that way I didn't lose my colony of bees, and I just didn't disrupt the people around me. And have a problem with people saying, you're not controlling your bees. So swarm management is very, very necessary. And when you catch a swarm, I'm a big fan on quarantining your swarm and checking it for problems. The reason I quarantine my swarm is to help prevent a swarm from possibly bringing disease into my apiary. Keep your swarms in a location just to have problems. So when you see a big swarm of bees and stuff, and you're like so excited and stuff, and you clip them and you dump them in your bucket or your tote box or whatever you're going to haul the bees in, bring some alcohol, and already you might as well do an alcohol wash with the bees. Just take a cup or two of those bees and put them in a mason jar with the alcohol and give them a shake. And then when you take your bees and you go to put them in a beehive, right? We use 5/8-inch holes in our brood boxes. We don't have big entranceways. We're using 5-inch holes with nook discs. And sometimes I dump my swarm inside my hive box, and I have those nook discs just turned so ventilation happens and those bees are trapped inside. So I have a feeder inside there, and the bees are trapped inside there, and they're isolated. That way, when I get home, I can do that alcohol wash, and I can see if they have mites. And I can kind of see, if I want to, I can take a couple bees out, and I can put them under the microscope and see if they have trachea mite. I can kind of examine the bees to see if they have disformed wing. I can open the disc a day later and let the bees come out. And if they start having poop all over the front stuff, I might think they might have nosema or dysentery. And I don't want that stuff in my colonies or in my apiary. So if you get a swarm of bees, sometimes you should go ahead and quarantine, do a little bit of a mite inspection and stuff to see before you get them inside your apiary. That way they're not spreading American foul brood with some spores or anything like that. So quarantining is something that I kind of recommend when you catch your swarms. So to go over swarming here real quick, you're going to need a location to put your swarm at. So you should always have a couple empty hives ready, a couple nook boxes ready, or where you're going to put the bees. You should have a location in case you get swarms or a swarm call, so you have a place to put them. You're going to need a catch. So you're going to use something to catch the bees in. We're using 5-gallon buckets to 6-gallon buckets to catch swarms in, and we're putting a lure inside those buckets. And we're using lemongrass oil. There's many types of lures out there. And like I said, there's many types of swarm traps out there, from nook boxes to fiber boxes to buckets. It just depends on what you want to use. So with those three things, a place to put your bees when you get them, a way to trap the bees when they swarm, and a lure to drive them there, you're going to do really good. And this is a great book to read. if you want to know about swarming and management, stability of making swarms, this is a great book. I know a lot of people that compress their bees and keep them in a small location all the time, so they're always making queens naturally. And then they just pull those frames out with the queen cells on them and just transferring some bees over. And that's how they're splitting their hives, is by this swarm essential, is how they're doing that. So here's a great book you can kind of get into if you want to read about swarm management and techniques of how to recover. Even if your bees have swarmed, that little hive, how you're going to go ahead and put a division boards in that hive and compact the little amount of bees that were in there so they can regrow and come out of a swarm that has a problem. So that's basically swarm management right there in a nutshell.
Michael?
Yes.
Hi, Vance Hayes. Sorry I came in late. Is it possible for you to
Okay.
slide on the YouTube of building the swarm bucket once more?
Sure. Let me
I didn't have my camera ready.
sure, let me see if I can pull it all up here again. And I'll get right to that location.
I sure appreciate your presentation.
Sure, I hope it's helping people. Like I said, there's thousands of ways to build them. Everybody has their own way. I just think that you just need the basics. So can you see it?
Yes. Got it.
Yeah, if you take a picture of
Thank
that,
you.
that's my channel. And yeah, it'll just show you how to build one of these. It makes it super easy to get up and to get going on making one. And what it does is it breaks it down into really simple measures. So after you kind of build this, you're like, well, heck, man, I'll just go ahead and I'll just get a ratchet strap and I'll put a nook box in a crook of a tree and just ratchet strap in there, right? The reason we make the mobile swarm trap is that, like I said, I have locations throughout Cheyenne that I set, I got an alley. I set one of these up in an alley in a location, and I check it about every 3 to 4 days all the way until about, mid-June. And I guess that's something else we should talk about. Swarms happen at different altitudes, climates, and location. That in California, Florida, and Texas, they're about towards the middle of their swarm season. That they started swarming about February. Here in Wyoming, we're just starting to start now. Is when it will start, and it'll go all the way to June. And there's some sayings like, a swarm in May is, hay. Swarm in July is not for this guy. I mean, there's all kinds of sayings, but it has to do with your location too. And you, as a beekeeper, you need to go ahead and make your journal. I teach journal beekeeping, that you don't have to write everything for every beehive, but you should be writing like, oh, in my journal last year, it says this time we had a swarm. So that I better go ahead and have my swarm traps out. Right. So by keeping a journal, you'll know that between, about the end of March to the middle of June in the Rocky Mountain area is about swarm season, give or take. If you're down in Pueblo, Colorado and stuff, it might be a little earlier. They have a little longer season than we do. If you're up north towards Montana and into the Dakota area, you might wait a little bit until the middle of May, to start your swarm trap, because it's still cold there. They're still going to get some frost. So, it's climate, altitude, and location for the swarming season. So that's something also to think about when you're doing your swarm. I split a lot of my beehives and stuff, so we don't have a lot of swarming. The purpose of a commercial beekeeper is apiary growth. So making lots of splits, or as you saw Tate do in the last session of I think it's called the Trervoff, and I'm not really good with the names, but it's a forcing swarm is basically what he did. Is he forced the beehive to swarm by doing this type of split, which built his apiary. He made one hive and made it into two. So if you're doing stuff like this, swarm can make colonization. I have some. What meat is this? That's a braggot, Adam. I have a braggot here. Danielle says he saw some of the pictures before. Does the straw hang down from the thumbtack? Thank you. Yeah, like I said, I like a Slurpee straw because they're big and round. They're a bigger straw. You can stuff cotton in them really good. And then they have I only cut them so they're only like 3 inches, 4 inches long. But they have a spoon on the other, so you can just stick the thumbtack in the spoon, and you can stick it right on the wall of the beehive or your nook or on the roof of your bucket or whatever. So yeah, the lure you just put in there. It says, would a swarm trap with the lure in it have your attempts current bees to swarm? No. Great information, appreciate it. Yeah, Michael, right there, Tom. Yeah, thanks for posting the YouTube. Like I said, you can get on there and you can see what it is. How do you quarantine your hive? Okay, so as a backyard beekeeper, it's a little harder for you, but I'm sure you can make a friend. And so I have hive locations throughout different areas, but I have a quarantine location specifically for the bees. So there's 2 ways you can do quarantining. Is that if you collect the swarm and you bring your hive and everything, and so you put your butterfly net underneath it, and you shake the tree limb, and all the bees fall in it, and you just spin that butterfly net, and all the bees are trapped in it. And you walk 2 or 3 steps over to your beehive, and you untwist that net, and you shake your bees in it. You put the lid on it, and you tell the people, hey, I'll be back here probably tomorrow or the next day. I just want to make sure all the bees are getting into this beehive, and I don't want them to go anywhere. Right? So you can leave it there at that location, taking some bees with you to do your mite check and test. Right? And if you leave it there and the doors are open so the bees can come in and out, so you can make sure you're getting all of the bees, you can check on the front of the beehive for dysentery. So you can quarantine them in place. Or another thing is that you have a buddy that's outside of town, or a location outside of town, or that's, basically, 2 or 3 miles away from your apiary. You can quarantine the bees there just to kind of see how they react, what they're doing, to see, you're able to take a couple bees to see if they've deformed wing, do an alcohol check for mites, see if they got a little dysentery by pooping and stuff outside. And if they seem okay, in a week or so, bring them back in and add them to your apiary. So I quarantine my hives by that way, 2 ways. Location quarantining, just quarantine in spot for a couple days while the bees acclimate to that hive, or I move them to a location about 2 to 3 miles from my apiary. That way they're not, that way if those bees go out and if they have mites, they get in flowers out at a different location. My bees aren't feeding in those flowers where the mites can jump on them and bring them back home. That's one reason why I use a quarantining. So hopefully that tells you how to quarantine your hives a little bit. I used to have a farm that was 5 miles away from my main yard. I would use that to quarantine a swarm or a cutout. Yeah, totally, Adam. That's basically what I'm saying is, just kind of buddy up with somebody, and you don't want to move it to another guy's apiary. So if it's somebody in your bee club, they're not going to take your quarantine bees. They might even have a location themselves that they can say, hey, you got some bees you caught in that swarm, you want to quarantine them for a couple days. I got a quarantine site. You can put them and we can feed them and stuff and see how they do. So, quarantining, I just recommend it because, You don't want to bring anything back to your apiary and then just ruin your whole apiary. Hopefully you guys are doing an inspection. You know, I teach the 9/11 method of the M3 style of beekeeping, and all of that has to go with your beekeeping skill. I mean, there's Perone hives, there's EcoBox hives, there's Sun hives, there's AZ hives, Langstroth hives, Top Bar hives. I mean, there's rose hives. I mean, there's 7 different hives right there and then you have to develop a system of beekeeping to watch them. We watch our bees every 9 to 11 days. If we're not checking sooner than that, those are the maximum time spans that I let my bees not being observed is 9 to 11 days. It helps me catch the queen. So if I see queen cups and stuff, I'm able to do splits. So it really helps out on that measure to prevent swarming. One thing you got to remember is that you're trying to prevent swarming. You know, if I just pinch the queen cells, population is still there. They're still going to make more queens. They're still eventually going to swarm. Right? So it's one of those things that, you know, you need to take out a couple frames of broods. That way something's not hatching. Or you do a split in some measure to control that. Because that's one reason why we're teaching about swarm traps, is that if you put these around your apiary and you know you don't know what you're really looking at. What if you're a brand new beekeeper and you don't know what I'm really looking at? At least I got some swarm traps around that if I do miss the queen cell and the bees decide to go extend from the hive, at least I can catch them and I'm not being a nuisance to anybody else. So does anybody else have any other questions or anything? Feel free to ask about anything. You know, there's a lot of other beekeepers on here and they can chime in, and you know, if they have a photo or something of their swarm trap, you know, there's many out there. Feel free to watch some YouTube videos. Remember, it's not all knowing, but it does give your mind some thought to kind of help with this.
Michael, that was a great program. I'm not seeing a lot of questions coming in. So you've apparently covered it very well. And if there isn't any more questions, I will have another beekeeping program next Tuesday, same time, same place. And I think we're going to be addressing Asian hornets, since that's in the news and seems to be kind of scaring everybody right now. So we'll tackle that topic, and let's hope that nasty creature never comes here. Michael, do you have any thoughts or comments about the Asian hornet?
I think it's too cold here. I don't think they'll migrate this far. I think I think they only have them in like Washington right now. It's just like Africanized bees. I think I'm the only guy that's ever went to Oklahoma to get drones from an Africanized hive to bring back to try to bring in some diversity into my beehive. So we don't have Africanized bees here. I doubt we'll have the hornets here like that. Now down in Texas and places like that, I'm sure you might, you know, with how migration and stuff goes, you know, it depends on what the hives bring back from, you know, the almond fields of California. You know, they're all just wrapped up by now, and they're on to their second stages of pollinating oranges and avocados and apples and pears. So
Yeah,
those are actually moving up into those locations where those Asian hornets are.
Yep, that would be a concern, because there's a lot of beekeepers going up to Washington State for that next phase of pollination, and just hope they double check or triple check their hives and not bring anybody home that we would not like to see.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's a very valid concern. It's a ground nesting hornet, and if it goes deep enough, it could escape a hard winter.
Well, my understanding is also that depending on what the ground is and the location where they decide to dwell, they also killed the plant life. That because they're going into the ground and digging it all up, that they're they try to get underneath the bush and stuff, and that they end up killing some of that habitat as well.
Wow. They're,
Yeah. Yeah, if you have any other questions or anything that you would like answered based on this topic or any other topic, you can get me at abfriendlycompany@gmail.com. And it's spelled ABEE, like the honeybee. Friendly Company, all one word, abfriendlycompany@gmail.com. You can always post if you got that YouTube site. You can always chime in on one of the posts that's there. You can always find me on Facebook with any information. And like I said, I've been teaching beekeeping for over 15 years on different levels. And right now I'm working with the University of Nebraska on coming out with the first commercial degree. So you usually have an apprentice, a journeyman, and a master. And then the advanced one is commercial beekeeping, of where you're actually going to make a profit from your beekeeping. So I can take any topics you want all the way around, and hopefully Kathleen will let me do a mead making course on here one time. We'll teach about making your product into something fun to drink.
yeah, there you go. Hey, Michael, one more question here. When would you use a bee vac for a swarm?
You can use it whenever. If it's a swarm of bees and it's in a location that's hard to get to, like it's on the side of a wall, right? And they're starting to, like, you think they're going to start going right into this wall of this house. You could just use your bee vac and suck them all up. I would get a good bee vac. A lot of bee vacs that you see in videos that are made, it kills the bees. They just suck them in and it squishes all the bees. You got to remember, these bees in a swarm are full of nectar, so they're going to regurgitate that. It's like being on a roller coaster ride and you get sick. So they're going to be sticky and they're going to throw that up and it's going to go all over inside that. So bee vacs, I don't really use. Usually swarms are really easy. You just have your bee brush and a dustpan. You can just scrape them in the dustpan and dump them in the bucket. Scrape them in the dustpan, dump them in a bucket. The only time I use a bee vac is on a removal. And that's just to make sure I'm getting everything out, and I move real slow so I can clean off a brood frame, so I can wire the brood frame into a frame. Then I can stick it down in there. And that way I can really go through and I can really make sure that I'm not killing the bees and stuff from that. And a bee vac doesn't have a lot of suction. I mean, it's not a good bee vac isn't really like sucking the bees up. It's kind of light. It just kind of gets them down in there and kind of works them into the vac itself. But I'm not a real big big fan of a bee vac unless you really know how to use one, and I'm going to tell you, and you spend some money to get a good one, or really work on designing one that doesn't kill the bees. Where can you sign up? Donnell, you know where to sign up, man. You've got a hold of me. I've done a lot of classes at Donnell Freeman's Freeman Family Farm in Colorado Springs. He's getting into breeding colonies here shortly and just getting ready to sell packages or nooks. We like to sell starter hives and nooks. We're not really big into packages, but Donnell Freeman Family Farms, he can down in Colorado Springs, he can help out people in that area. And that's another thing. If you have a lot of questions and stuff, there's people from all over the world that I hope are watching this, and go to your organization, have them have a seminar and a class. If someone has a swarm and they say, well, I'm not really giving it away, not just say, hey, I'd like to just watch you to remove it. I'd like to film it so I can kind of see what's going on. People don't mind.
Hey, Michael, another question here. When splitting, can you use frames from more than one hive, or do they all need to be from the same hive?
Man, that's a great question. Whoever wrote that, that's a great question. On splitting a hive, you have to have the question, why are you splitting that hive? And there's usually two, right? I'm either going to split it so they don't swarm because it's too full, or like I use the M3 system of beekeeping. So we usually have 24 frames in a brood box. right? So with 24 frames, I can probably split that hive 18 times into 18 new colonies by taking a frame out with brood and bees and putting it in a 3-frame nook and adding a queen to it. And I can just go ahead and split that hive. Now, if you have a box that's full of brood and you want to go ahead and take some of those frames out and stick it in a nook, and you want to go to another frame, I got 2 hives that are just extremely full, and you want to take the brood out of each one of those hives, as long as the brood's is capped, and you put it in there, when those bees hatch, they're part of that hive. So when splitting, you can use frames from a couple different hives to make a full colony if you want to of active bees. But you got to remember, when you take a frame out with brood on it, you're going to take some bees with it. We're different than Florida, Texas, and California, and places like that. Right now, the temperatures are still too cold that you're going to have bees rest on that brood to keep it warm. Now, if you're in California, we have temperatures right now where it's 82 degrees at 10 o'clock at night. You're not going to need a lot of warmth on that brood. But if you're taking frames of brood from hive and you're taking bees with it, remember you're removing colony workers to go with that brood into a new box. So from 2 different hives, you can remove brood and put it in there, but you got to have bees already in that box to keep that brood warm, because if you pull a brood frame with bees on it from one colony and a brood frame with bees from the other, and you stick it in there, they're not going to mesh real well. There's going to be some fights going on. So it depends on the situation and what you're doing with, and you really got to kind of watch on how you're, if you're pulling a brood, a frame out and sticking it in, as they call it hive building, right? That I have a hive that's weak, so I pull a frame of brood out of a hive and I stick it in there. So when that brood hatches, it colonizes. A medium frame of bees that has brood on both sides is around 6,200 bees, right? And that's a medium frame brood both sides. That's 6,000 bees, right? So you've almost got, with one frame of a medium, that's almost 10,000 bees. So that's almost 3 pounds of bees, of hatching bees. Almost. I mean, 10,000 and 6,000. There's a 4,000 difference. I understand, but I'm just kind of giving you an example that if you pull one medium frame out with brood capped on both sides, you've almost got what a package bee would be giving you. That's why nooks and starter hives are so expensive and super awesome to use, because you're getting a lot more bees, a lot more brood, and the queen's laying. And that's why I think that's why packages, when we buy packages, we buy a package with 2 extra queens. And I make 3-frame nook boxes, and we put a queen in it, a queen in it, and a queen in it, and I just dump a third of those bees out of those packages in each one of those hives. And instead of spending, I don't know, $500 on 3 packages of bees, I spent $225, and I got 3 packages, or 3 starter nooks started, and just didn't make a huge investment on that. That's commercial beekeeping and some practices about that. So brood building and stuff, if you're moving them out, no bees on them, but make sure you have enough bees in that hive to work with that brood and to keep it warm, especially in our area.
Well,
So,
Michael,
yeah, go
we're
ahead.
kind of running out of our time here. So, and I'm not seeing any more questions come in, but to everyone who's still here and listening and watching us, again, we're going to continue to have beekeeping webinars or Zoom meetings throughout the season. So just stick with us and we'll try to help you and get you through.
Yeah, happy beekeeping, everybody. Hopefully you catch some swarms.
All right. Well, good night, everybody. And I'll get this I'll work on getting this posted to YouTube and put that address out here shortly. So again, everybody have a great week and stay healthy.
Thanks for including me, Catherine.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to see you and hear from you again, Vance. Thanks for joining us.
Sure appreciate you including me. Thanks. Bye.